In this video, we are going to study about the humerus. The humerus is the bone of the arm and it is the longest of long bones of the upper limb. It presents an upper end. So this is the upper end. Then you have lower end and in the middle you have the shaft. Now we'll see the upper end of the humerus. It consists of head. So this is the head. Then you have the lesser tubercle. So this is the lesser tubercle. And this is the greater tubercle. In between the two tubercle, you have the intertubercular sulcus. So the upper end of the humerus has the upper part of the intertubercular sulcus. So between the two tubercles, intertubercular sulcus. So upper end of the humerus consists of head, lesser tubercle, greater tubercle and the upper part of the intertubercular sulcus. The head of the humerus is articular and it is spheroidal and forms about 1/3 of a sphere. It is directed medially, then backward and upward and articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula to form the ball and socket shoulder joint or glenohumeral joint. The glenoid cavity is too shallow and less extensive for the humeral head, thus permitting wide range of movement. The head is covered by hyaline cartilage, which is thickest at the center and thinner at the periphery. The axis of the humeral head makes an angle with the axis of the lower end of the humerus, which measures about 164 degrees in adult, and this is known as the angle of humeral torsion. The part highlighted in the pink is the lesser tubercle of the humerus. The lesser tubercle presents a smooth muscular impression which projects forward just beyond the head. It receives the insertion of subscapularis tendon which extends slightly downwards into the shaft. The lateral margin of the lesser tubercle is sharp and it is separated from the greater tubercle by the upper part of the intertubercular sulcus. So this is the intertubercular sulcus. Here you can see the lesser tubercle gives insertion to the subscapularis muscle and the lateral margin of the lesser tubercle gives attachment to the transverse humeral ligament. So this ligament retains the tendon of the long head of the biceps brachii muscle along with its synovial sheath in position. Next we'll see about the greater tubercle. So whichever highlighted in the pink is the greater tubercle. The greater tubercle occupies the most lateral part of the upper end and its convex lateral surface projects beyond the acromion and forms the rounded contour of the shoulder. This surface is covered by deltoid muscle separated by the subacromion bursa. The upper and the posterior surface of the greater tubercle presents 3 flat impressions for the muscular attachment. The upper one is for the supraspinatus muscle and the middle one for the infraspinatus muscle and the lower one for the teres minor. So here you can see the muscles inserted to the greater tubercle from above downwards along the upper and the posterior surface of the greater tubercle. You have the supraspinatus muscle. Then the middle impression gives attachment to the infraspinatus muscle, and the lower impression gives attachment to the teres minor muscle. The tendons of the four scapulohumeral muscle, the subscapularis muscle, the supraspinatus muscle, infraspinatus muscle and teres minor muscle around the upper end of the humerus. It blends with the capsule of the shoulder joints and forms a rotator cuff, which is indispensable for the stability of the joint. The humerus possesses three types of neck. You have the anatomical neck, then you have the surgical neck, and the third neck is the morphological neck. The anatomical neck is a constriction that immediately succeeds the head. The surgical neck, the whichever highlighted in the violet color, is the surgical neck. It is a constriction between the expanded upper end and the cylindrical shaft of the humerus, and this is embraced posteriorly by the axillary nerve and the posterior circumflex humeral vessels. A fracture of the surgical neck may involve the axillary nerve with consequent paralysis of the deltoid muscle. The third neck is the morphological neck, and it is represented by the epiphyseal line between the upper epiphysis and the diaphysis of the young humerus. It usually situated about 0.5 centimeter above the surgical neck, and in adult the morphological neck disappears. So here you can see the surgical neck is related to the axillary nerve and the posterior circumflex humeral vessels. Next we'll see the capsular ligament of the shoulder joint. The capsular ligament of the shoulder joint is attached along the anatomical neck except at two sides. First one, at the upper end of the intertubercular sulcus, the capsule is deficient to allow the transmission of the long head of the biceps brachiae accompanied by a synovial sheath. When you see medially, the lower part of the capsule extends about 1 centimeter below the anatomical neck to encroach on the medial side of the surgical neck. Next we'll see about the shaft. The shaft of the humerus is cylindrical in the upper half and triangular on cross section in the lower half. The shaft presents three borders and three surfaces. The borders are anterior border, then you have the medial border, and then you have the lateral border. The three surfaces are anteromedial surface, then you have the anterolateral surface, and then you have the posterior surface. Now we'll see about the anterior border. The anterior border extends from the front of the greater tubercle to the lower end of the humerus in between the coronoid and the radial fossae of the humerus. In the upper third, it forms the lateral lip of the intertubercular sulcus, and its succeeding part, it delimits the anterior limb of the deltoid tuberosity, and the lower part of the border is smooth and rounded. Now we'll see about the medial border. It extends from the tip of the medial epicondyle to the medial lip of the intertubercular sulcus. In the lower half, it is sharp and it forms the medial supracondylar ridge. Near the middle of the shaft, it forms a rough strip. In the upper third, It is continuous with the medial lip of the intertubercular sulcus to the lesser tubercle. Next we'll see about the lateral border. The lateral border forms the lateral supracondylar ridge in the lower part, which extends from the tip of the greater epicondyle. Close to the middle of the shaft, the border fades away by the lower end of the spiral groove or the radial groove. Further above, it extends behind the posterior limb of the delta tuberosity, and it is continuous with the posterior margin of the greater tubercle. Next we'll see about the anteromedial surface. It intervenes between the anterior border and the medial border of the humerus. In the upper 1/3 of the anteromedial surface, you have the intertubercular sulcus or the bicipital groove. It contains the long head of the biceps brachiae with its synovial sheath and an ascending branch of the anterior circumflex humeral artery. The sulcus presents a medial lip. So this is the medial lip, and then you have the lateral lip and a floor. The lateral lip receives the bilaminar insertion of the pectoralis major. The floor receives the insertion of the latissimus dorsi and the medial lip for the teres major. Out of the three muscles, the attachment of the pectoralis major is the longest and that of the latissimus dorsi is the shortest. Here you can see the bicipital groove or the intertubercular sulcus. It lodges the tendon of the long head of the biceps brachiae muscle along with its synovial sheath, and you have the ascending branch of the anterior circumflex humeral artery. Here you can see the medial lip of the intertubercular sulcus gives attachment to the teres major muscle. The floor of the intertubercular sulcus gives attachment to the latissimus dorsi muscle, and the lateral lip of the intertubercular sulcus gives attachment to the pectoralis major muscle. The roughened strip in the middle of the shaft receives the insertion of the coracobrachialis muscle. Close to the insertion of the coracobrachialis, the medial border presents a foramen for the passage of the nutrient branch of the brachial artery, which is directed towards the lower end of the bone. In the lower half, the anteromedial surface together with the adjacent anterolateral surface and the rounded anterior border provides origin to the brachialis muscle. The brachialis muscle, it embraces the V-shaped insertion of the deltoid muscle and extends for the attachment to the lower part of the spiral groove. The medial supracondylar ridge gives attachment to the medial intermuscular septum, which intervenes between the flexor and the extensor compartments of the arm. Traced above, the septum passes behind the coracobrachialis and subsequently fades away. The medial septum is pierced in the middle by the ulnar nerve and the superior ulnar collateral artery. Slightly above the medial epicondyle, the medial intermuscular septum is pierced by the posterior branch of the inferior ulnar collateral artery. The lower part of the medial supracondylar ridge in front of the medial septum, it gives origin to the humeral head of the pronata teres muscle. Sometimes a hook-like supracondylar process projects from the anteromedial surface about 5 cm above the medial epicondyle. It is connected by a fibrous band to the medial epicondyle, and this band is known as the ligament of Struther. It represents phylogenetically the remnant of the third head of the coracobrachialis. If present, the medial nerve and the brachial artery or both may be compressed by this ligament. The foramen formed between the ligament of Struther and the humerus. It resembles the end epitrochlear foramen of carnivores and some other animals. So here you can see the radiological picture of the supracondylar process. Next we'll study about the anterolateral surface. So this surface intervenes between the anterior and the lateral border of the humerus. Near the middle of the shaft, a V-shaped deltoid tuberosity affects this surface. It receives the insertion of the deltoid muscle. The part of the surface above the tuberosity is covered by the deltoid, separated by an extension of the subacromial bursa. The rest of the surface below the tuberosity provides origin to the brachialis. So here you can see the deltoid tuberosity receives the insertion of the deltoid muscle, and below that the anterolateral surface gives origin to the brachialis muscle. Next we'll see about the lateral supracondylar ridge. It presents a narrow rough strip along its anterior surface, and the ridge gives attachment to the lateral intermuscular septum, and this is pierced by the radial nerve and the anterior descending branch of the arteria profunda brachiae. Upper two-thirds of the narrow strip, it gives origin to the brachioradialis muscle, and the lower one-third to the extensor carpi radialis longus muscle. Next we'll study about the posterior surface of the humerus. The posterior surface is extensive and intervenes between the medial and the lateral border of the humerus. A spiral, a radial groove passes downwards and laterally along the middle one-third of this surface. It transmits the radial nerve and the profunda brachiae vessels along the groove towards the anterolateral surface. The lower part of the floor of the groove is occupied by the origin of the brachialis muscle. The spiral groove is bounded above by an oblique ridge which gives origin to the lateral head of the triceps brachiae muscle, and upper one-third of the posterior surface above the oblique ridge is under cover of the deltoid muscle, and it is crossed transversely behind the cervical neck by the axillary nerve and the posterior circumflex humeral vessel. Rest of the posterior surface below the spiral groove is extensive and smooth, and it provides origin to the medial head of the triceps, the tapering upper end of which extends above close to the lower attachments of the teres major muscle. Here you can see the origin of the medial head of the triceps, which takes origin from the posterior surface below the spiral groove, and this is the lateral head of the triceps which takes origin from the oblique ridge above the spiral groove. Next we'll study about the lower end of the humerus. It is enlarged transversely to form the condyle, which consists of articular and non-articular part. First we'll study about the articular part. It forms the elbow joint with the participation of the radius and the ulna. It consists of capitulum laterally and trochlea medially. The capitulum is less than half of a sphere, and it is articular in front and below, but its posterior surface is non-articular and palpable through the skin in extended elbow. It articulates with the disc-like upper surface of the head of the radius which comes in contact with the inferior surface of the capitulum in extension and with the anterior surface in flexion. Next we'll study about the trochlea. The trochlea forms an asymmetrical pulley and its articular area covers the anterior, inferior and posterior surfaces. It articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulna, and the ulna comes in contact with the postero-inferior surface of the trochlea in extension, but during flexion it slides onto the anterior surface of the trochlea. The medial flange is broader than the lateral flange, and the medial margin it extends 6 millimeters below that the lateral margin. As a result, the forearm is deviated away from the upper arm in an extended and supinated position, forming the carrying angle, which forms an obtuse angle on the lateral side and measures about 163 degrees. This angle helps to carry a load grasped by the hand without any contact of the ulnar border of the forearm with the lateral surface of the thigh. It is said that in female the deviation of the forearm is more pronounced due to the wider breadth of the pelvis, and the carrying angle however disappears during flexion and pronation of forearm. In this image you can see this is the long axis of the arm and this is the long axis of the forearm. The difference medially it is about 10 to 15 degree. So this is the carrying angle. When you calculate laterally it is about 163 degree. Next we'll see the non-articular part. The non-articular part includes three fossae: the radial fossa, the coronoid fossa and the olecranon fossa. It also includes the medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyles of the humerus. The radial fossa lies immediately above the capitulum on the anterior surface of the lower end. It accommodates the margins of the head of the radius in full flexion. The coronoid fossa lies above the trochlea and medial to the radial fossa. It is occupied by the anterior margin of the coronoid process of the ulna during flexion of the elbow. Then the olecranon fossa, it is a deep depression situated on the posterior surface above the trochlea. It lodges the apex of the olecranon process in extended elbow. Sometimes the floor of the fossa is deficient. All non-articular fossae are within the attachment of the articular capsule and are covered with the synovial membrane. Next we'll see about the medial epicondyle. It forms a blunt, palpable projection which is directed medially and slightly backward. The tip of the epicondyle gives attachment to the anterior and the posterior bands of the ulnar collateral ligament. Here you can see the tip of the medial epicondyle gives attachment to the anterior and the posterior bands of the ulnar collateral ligament. The antero-inferior surface of the epicondyle presents an impression for the common origin of the superficial group of the flexor muscle. The posterior surface of the base of the medial epicondyle is grooved for the enlargement of the ulnar nerve. Before the ulnar nerve enters the forearm between the two heads of the flexor carpi ulnaris. Here, the ulnar nerve can be rolled against the bone, producing a characteristic tingling sensation. Next, we'll see about the lateral epicondyle. It presents a less prominent projection which is directed laterally and slightly forward. The tip of the lateral epicondyle gives attachment to the radial collateral ligament. An impression on the anterolateral surface provides common origin to the superficial group of the extensor muscles of the forearm. The posterior surface of the lateral epicondyle gives origin to the anconeus. Next we'll see the attachment of the capsular ligament of the elbow joint to the lower end of the humerus. This is represented by a continuous line which excludes the two epicondyle but includes the three non-articular foci. So when you see the special comments, the scapulohumeral muscles are attached around the head to the upper end of the humerus. The thoracohumeral muscles are attached along the intertubercular sulcus. The upper half of the humerus receives only the insertion of the muscles except the lateral head of the triceps. The lower half of the humerus provides solely the origins of the muscles. The nerves in direct contact with the humerus are the axillary nerve around the cervical neck, the radial nerve in the spiral groove, the ulnar nerve behind the medial epicondyle. These nerves rest on the diaphysis and may be involved in the fracture of the bone. The common sites of fracture of humerus are at the cervical neck or the middle of the shaft or at the supracondylar region. The junction of the upper and the middle third of the shaft possess poor blood supply, hence a fracture at this region may be associated with delayed union or non-union. Since the fusion of the upper epiphysis takes place later than that of the lower epiphysis, the upper end of the humerus forms the growing end. In amputation of arm of young individual, sufficient amount of soft tissue should be left distal to the site of amputation and then sutured. Otherwise, the progressive growth of the humerus through the soft tissue might produce a painful conical stump.